Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to talk about Robert Sapolsky. Robert Sapolsky is an American neuroscientist and author from the late 20th and early 21st centuries. He has a rather unique worldview, but also a very challenging, very controversial one. Today, I'd like to present the main principles of his philosophy, because I am certain they'll give you something to think about. But first, who is Robert Sapolsky? Sapolsky is a rather peculiar man, both in his science and his personality. He is quite brilliant, rather engaging, and doesn't hesitate to attack our most fundamental beliefs head-on, even with scientific data. In Sapolsky's field, the most common and accepted idea is that humans have free will, but Sapolsky hates that idea. He hates it so much that he dedicated his entire career and his 2023 book, Determined, to dismantling it, just to prove it wrong. Unfortunately for Sapolsky, many thinkers, like philosopher Daniel Dennett, push back, arguing his view robs our achievements of their meaning. That's why Sapolsky developed his theory of determinism, and coming from him, that's not a depressing thought, if you know what I mean. In Sapolsky's view, our biology, from genes to hormones, and our environment, from childhood to culture, dictate everything we do. A true understanding of behavior can't be validated by our intuitions about choice. If it is, then it's not a true understanding. To him, realizing this is the key to a more empathetic and just world. So Sapolsky is a rebellious scientist, a defiant thinker, but maybe also a scientist who is a bit frustrated by our inability to accept what he sees as an obvious scientific truth. So if every action you take is predetermined, if you couldn't have done otherwise, then what can we say about personal responsibility? Isn't Robert Sapolsky just giving everyone a get-out-of-jail-free card by saying we have no free will? Well, not exactly. Remember his core idea? He says we are nothing more or less than the sum of that which we could not control. Every human behavior is simply an outcome of biology and environment interacting. And we, as human beings, as products of this world, are just walking, talking outcomes of this causal chain. So if we were able to truly understand all the factors leading up to a decision, we would also be able to see that the decision was inevitable. So what does science tell us about our choices? It tells us we make them. That's the most basic thing about being human. We feel like we are in control. Now, if we ask the question, why did you make that choice? Well, that's where things get more complicated. You might be tempted to say, I chose it because I wanted to. What more is there to say? For decades, research from neuroscience and psychology has shown us how we choose. For example, studies like those by Benjamin Libet demonstrated that the brain activity for a decision happens seconds before we are consciously aware of making it. But why did this happen? Why that specific brain activity? Why that specific choice? We know how the choice appeared, but we don't know the ultimate why. And to that why, Sapolsky has an answer: determinism. It is the inescapable web of prior causes that makes the choice exist. Everything from your hormone levels this morning, to your genetic predispositions, to the culture you were raised in, all of it funnels you toward one, and only one, possible action. The free will Sapolsky talks about isn't a separate self making choices. The force he's referring to is the internal machinery of our bodies. It's the invisible world of genes, hormones, and brain structures that animates our behavior in ways we cannot control. As Sapolsky puts it, free will is what we call the biology that hasn't been discovered yet. We aren't consciously aware of these deep processes. In his work, Behave, he shows how over 75 different hormones, like cortisol and testosterone, shape our actions across different timescales. The effects of these hormones are beyond the capacities of our conscious control, so we cannot will them away. The expression of our biology is our behavior, and it is no coincidence that our behavior so often feels automatic. Think of the stress hormone cortisol. When it's released, it physically alters brain function, impacting our decisions and emotions in that very moment. Our biology is the inner reality, while our behavior is the outer reality, the surface of who we are. The roughly 20,000 genes active in our brains contribute to our tendencies for things like empathy or risk-taking. This genetic foundation, combined with factors like early brain development shaped by prenatal conditions, is the deep, underlying current. Our actions are the surface, visible and expressed, but ultimately driven by those depths. We are bound to our biological reality. If our biology isn't under our control, what about the world around us? Not exactly. As the neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky argues, you don't get to choose the key ingredients of your life. In his own words, you cannot decide all the sensory stimuli in your environment, your hormone levels this morning, whether something traumatic happened to you in the past, the socioeconomic status of your parents, your fetal environment, your genes, whether your ancestors were farmers or herders. We are manifestations of these external forces. For instance, research shows that children from higher socioeconomic backgrounds will hear about 30 million more words by age 3. That isn't a choice. It's a circumstance that profoundly impacts cognitive development. For every adverse childhood experience a person endures, the likelihood of them developing antisocial behaviors in adulthood shoots up by 35. Sapolsky also explores how entire societies are shaped, whether they're collectivist or individualist, and how that molds the norms we live by. These powerful environmental determinants constantly interact with our biology, creating a seamless continuum where there's no crack for free will to intervene. The reason we act the way we do is the incredibly complex interwoven story of everything that came before you. So, if our choices are determined by our past, then what about our intentions? Isn't our intent the one thing we truly have control over? The signature of our free will? Well, not exactly. The person you are, the intent you form, is the result of every interaction between your biology and environment that came before things out of your control. This is the argument made by neuroscientist Robert M. Sapolsky. Our intentions aren't sparked by a free-floating us, but are forged by this long chain of events. Does that make sense? So what does science tell us? Your brain decides before you do. Classic studies, like the Libet experiments, showed that specific brain activity for an action happens before a person is consciously aware they've decided to act. I'm pretty sure that's not how you experience your choices, so why does it feel like you're choosing? We feel the choice, then we rationalize it as coming from us. Great. But why this feeling of control? Why the illusion of a commander in our heads? To that why, Sapolsky has an answer. It's a story. Our sense of choosing is a rationalization we make up after our brain has already set things in motion. In his book Determined, he shows how things as simple as hunger can sway a judge's ruling, shaping intent without anyone knowing. Even the power to veto an action, our free won't, he argues, is just as determined. Everything that exists as a choice comes from this determined process. The rejection of free will Sapolsky talks about has profound consequences. As he states in his book Determined, there can be no such thing as blame, and that punishment as retribution is indefensible. This isn't a simple excuse for bad behavior. The idea is a complete shift in how we approach moral responsibility, one that could reshape our entire justice system. If behavior is fully determined, then blaming an individual for their actions is like blaming a tornado for the destruction it causes. The human mind struggles with this. We want to assign responsibility. Yet, if our actions are the inevitable result of everything that came before, the very concept of culpability is an illusion. But we can see the effects of their actions. The expression of their determined biology is a danger to society, and the solution proposed, drawing on thinkers like Dirk Perreboom and Greg Caruso, uses the language of public health. The idea is to quarantine dangerous individuals, a word that implies containment for safety, not punishment for sin. In this sense, a criminal is not someone to be punished, but a person to be contained to prevent future harm. For Sapolsky, historical shifts show the way forward. The surface behavior of epilepsy, a seizure, was once seen as demonic possession. Meanwhile, the true cause was the brain's neurological wiring. Once we understood the cause, we moved from punishment to treatment, from blame to compassion. We are bound to address the causes, not just the surface representations. Critics like Daniel Dennett worry this undermines our motivation to achieve, but Sapolsky counters that it enhances our compassion, creating a more humane society by focusing on causes rather than culpability.